Judge Piet Koen has dismissed the special plea application by the former President Jacob Zuma to have State Prosecutor Advocate Billy Downer removed from his trial. Now, the trial date for the arms deal case has now been set for the 11th of April next year, a day before the former president's 80th birthday. Joining me now to discuss the new developments in the case is Advocate Modidima Mannya, a legal analyst. Advocate Mannya, thank you very much for your time today. From your legal expertise and your legal background, are there grounds here for an appeal? We've heard the Jacob Zuma Foundation saying that this is certainly a route that they will be suggesting and advocating for.
Good day and good day to your viewers. Yes, theoretically there's always a basis for an appeal, but remember that before you go on appeal, they will have to approach Judge Koen for leave to appeal. I'm very skeptical that he will grant such an application. He has relied on a judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal, and he has specifically indicated that it is binding, that the law is settled with regard to the issues that they raise. So there may not be any prospects of success, which is the main test in an appeal.
Talk to us about one of the points that was made quite repeatedly here, that the case that the former president is bringing forward is something, yes, that has been discussed before, but that it can also be discussed during the course of the trial, and the statements there being made that it wasn't really necessary to go this recusal application process. Your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think the point that the Judge Koen makes, and is actually the correct position, is that the responsibility contribute in assisting the court to ensure a fair trial for an accused. Now, to the extent that there may be issues which would impact on a fair trial, those issues, as the judge said, must be raised in the trial, and if necessary, the court will deal with them in that context and in that process. So he's correct to say that the process which was embarked upon was not actually a correct process, because the basis of the approach of this application was to assert Mr. Zuma's right to a fair trial. But a fair trial issue is what takes place during the trial, and it is the court which must determine, if necessary, whether the right to a fair trial has been violated during the trial.
If this indeed is the case, as been postulated, that this was not a necessary process, is the former president getting the best legal advice?
Well, you know, legal advice is based on what the legal advisors think is the appropriate. So whether it's good or bad, it's a very subjective matter. I would not be in a position to express an opinion. I don't know what informed their views and their approach.
What could then have informed their views and their approach? And as you think about this, what comes to mind for me is the point that was made by Judge Koen, that the character or whatever flaws that a prosecutor might have will or should not have any bearing on whether or not the accused gets a fair trial. How does one differentiate those two?
Well, that's not necessarily what Judge Koen said. And I think Judge Koen must not be misinterpreted to have said that the conduct of a prosecutor is irrelevant to a fair trial. I think firstly he says, when you want to determine whether a fair trial, the right to a fair trial is realized, the best forum is at the court. It is the court that must make that decision. There are instances where the misconduct of a prosecutor will impact on a trial and may require that the prosecutor be excused.
Advocate Mannya, we seem to have lost you there just at the peak of what we were discussing, and I saw the lights go out, probably load shedding, so we do apologize to you at home. We'll see if we can pick that conversation up at a later point, but a very a specific and necessary point that Advocate Mannya was trying to talk about now, whether or not the conduct of a prosecutor has any bearing on the outcome of the case and on the outcome of whether or not the accused gets a fair trial. We'll get an opportunity to delve deeper into that, hopefully a bit later on, should we be able to connect with the advocate. Advocate Modidima Mannya, legal analyst, rejoins us now. Advocate, glad to have you back. Just as you were explaining what I believe is a very important point of clarification, you are saying that Judge Koen was not necessarily saying that the conduct or the misconduct of a prosecutor is irrelevant. Explain that to us.
Yes, what Judge Koen is saying, firstly, is that the conduct of a prosecutor does not on its own determine whether there's a fair trial or not. It's for the court to deal with that issue. But he also said very specifically that what Mr. Zuma approached court on was on the issue of the title to prosecute, that he has not filed a substantive application. So there was no application before him to say these are the specific actions of Mr. Downer which affect my right to a fair trial. Thirdly, he said that the issues that were raised, I think 12 of the 14 grounds that have been raised, have already been dealt in the application for a stay of prosecution in the High Court, as well as in the Supreme Court of Appeal. Remember, this matter dates back to almost 15 years of litigation. So it doesn't necessarily render the conduct, but he has not found any basis to conclude that the conduct of Mr. Downer affects his title to prosecute.
What bearing, if any, Advocate Mannya, does the fact that charges have been laid against Advocate Downer, does that impact this case at all?
Well, you know, charges are made all the time, and I think the police will investigate. But as you could have seen, I think I've seen an article by Adrian Basson, and he sort of explained how this issue of the medical certificate found itself in the public domain, and amongst others, he's indicated that it is attached to both the application and the affidavit filed by Mr. Zuma. Now, as you know, court papers are public documents, so they have become public documents in that context. But I think the fact that there are criminal charges against Mr. Downer does not, again, detract from the fact that it is the court which must determine whether there is a fair trial issue. The medical certificate is not related to the charges.
Should there be an application or for leave to appeal, and should that be granted, could this delay the start date for the trial of April 2022?
Yes, it will possibly do so, depending on what the content of the issues that are the subject of the appeal is. Remember, in this case, Mr. Zuma had filed a special plea, and in his view, it's more or less somewhat something towards saying, don't prosecute me at all, which has already been rejected by the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal. So I'm not sure what would be the real content of the appeal and what exactly would they be appealing on. As the judge has already indicated, there's a judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal. In our law, there's what we call the precedence, and that is why he indicated specifically that he is bound by that judgment, even if he had a different view, which he also indicated he didn't have, by the way. So as I say, the test is whether there will be prospects of success, and I'm not sure, based on the authorities that are there, whether there will be any prospects of success.
Advocate Modidima Mannya, thank you very much for your analysis this afternoon. Very much appreciated.